Are you ready for the first part of the day? I hope so. I hope you have your notebooks open and, above all, your brains and minds open to be inspired by the next panel. Let me welcome, of course, on our virtual stage, the studio with Noor Hafez that is connecting with us from the TV studio in London. Hi, Noor, and over to you and this amazing panel. I can't wait to listen to.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your first panel of the second day of the challenge. Today, we're talking about good jobs and economic growth. So, economic growth alone does not necessarily translate to better or more jobs. And that's why I think it's so important that we be talking intentionally and very specifically about how we can be creating good jobs, and especially talking about how we can be building the infrastructure and technology to make sure that these can be available. And that's why I'm so delighted to have my expert panel here with me today. I'd love to introduce you to them all, and then I'll go to them to briefly introduce themselves as well. So today with me here, I have Malak El Baba, who is the country director for Visa Egypt. I have Oday Kamal, who is an innovation consultant and head of innovation at the World Food Programme. And I have Janina Conboye, who is an FT journalist working on the work and careers team. So I'd love to hear from you guys if you could introduce yourselves briefly. Malak, should we start with you?
Sure. Hi, Noor. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be with you today on this panel and on the opening session for today. My name is Malak El Baba. I'm the country manager for Visa in Egypt. And I'm super excited to be with you on this panel, especially when we're talking about economic growth and social impact, which is a topic that is very close to my heart and to my experience as well. So, looking forward to a very interesting discussion today.
Thank you, Malak. Alday?
Hello, Noor. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Oday, and I am the head of innovation at the World Food Programme Country Office here in Egypt. Really excited to just share some stories from what we've been doing here and our work in the field, as well as kind of learn from the others and answer some questions you might have.
Thank you. And Janina?
Hi, I'm Janina Conboy. I'm a journalist, a writer and editor predominantly on the FT's work and career section. So it has been quite an interesting time for us over the past 18 months with a complete change in how we work. And I'm excited to be here and talk about this topic today.
Great, great. So I'm just going to go straight into it with our first question. So I think it's really important before we start discussing this to really understand what we mean when we talk about good jobs. So I'd love to hear from you all how you define this and maybe what are some of the challenges when we are talking about good jobs. Maybe Oday, we can start with you.
Sure. I think this is one of the critical questions that we need to start with, especially when we talk about job growth in this era. Uh, if I want to kind of have a historical perspective on it, the pandemic was kind of a great way for us to reassess what it is to have a job. We've been seeing that trend, at least for the past 5 to 10 years, with people transitioning from a fixed term job that you'd have for the rest of your career to something that's a bit more based around the gig economy or freelancing. Uh, and I think that's more aligned with some of the historical trends. If we look at jobs before maybe the Industrial Revolution, a lot of it was based around getting stuff, doing it on an occasional, like for a season, for a specific period of time, and then going back and doing another one. The whole idea of having a job, one job that you do with an employer for your career or for a period of years, that's something that came up maybe in the past 100, 150 years. And we've been sitting with that construct through our parents, through our grandparents, and before that. But now all of that is changing, and we're moving more into that world that maybe we had before the Industrial Revolution, where you just would be able to take on a role, and we call it now freelancers. They had another name for it probably. The idea is just you'd be able to use your skill sets, upgrade them, and deploy them, and then you are part of this marketplace. Now we have the internet, which creates a much wider marketplace and opportunity for us to do so. And I think we can leverage it and take advantage of it. Through the work that we do at WFP, a lot of it is around youth unemployment. And we try to look at the nature of jobs. A lot of our work is with vulnerable communities. So when we go in the field, it's usually outside of urban centers where people are used to having jobs or where jobs are abundant. And we kind of switch to those areas to understand what are some of the gaps and demands. At least in my experience for Egypt, it's usually not an education gap, it's more of a skills gap. There's definitely a lot of people that have access to education, but the skills that they get are the ones that make them unemployable or don't give them the right opportunity. And we're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap and create an opportunity for them to do that.
Brilliant. Okay, great. And Janina, how is this idea of good jobs? What are the similarities and differences maybe in the areas that you cover?
I think the idea of good jobs, I think it is definitely, we're in an environment where everything's changing, and there is this idea of, there's no longer a job for life, and there is going to be more flexibility. But I think one really important thing to think about and consider is, despite the fact that younger generations are more comfortable with, being in the gig economy, for example, I think we shouldn't forget that at the end of the day, people still want security. And there is this issue of precarity. So I think, in this context of good jobs, while there's plenty more flexibility and potentially plenty of opportunity, I think also, how do we address this issue of precarity and make sure that people have access to health benefits, good wages, can get on the housing ladder, and all those sorts of things? Because there seems to be this idea that young people don't want all those things, which, some of it they don't. But one of their biggest concerns is, the fact that they don't have the same financial security as those who are baby boomers, for example, who've got good pensions to rely on. And also, I think there is definitely a skills gap. So I think it's about access to good jobs. So I think there's a role for both organisations and the state to get together and help people reskill and upskill so that they can then move into the jobs that are becoming available. So yeah, for me, that's what good jobs are really about, because, there are lots of good jobs out there, but a lot of it's about access and a lot of it is about security. And I think I can't speak for the global trends, but one thing I think is also an issue, particularly in the UK and the US, is access to entry-level jobs, which help sort of set you up to build a career. A lot of these entry-level jobs these days, they require more and more experience. And if they require experience, then how is that an entry-level job? And so what we're finding is graduates are struggling to access those entry-level jobs. And then also to fill that gap, particularly in the UK, we've had issues where there are a lot of unpaid internships. And when you've got unpaid internships, that affects those who are from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And, even in professions such as journalism, it's affected the diversity of the industry. So it's about recalibrating, providing access, and providing security for everybody.
Brilliant. And I think what you said about financial security is so important. And that brings me on to my next question, where financial inclusion is something that we've spoken about a lot, especially in terms of its connection to good jobs and how it relates to this. And I'd love to hear from you, Malak, in terms of what you think about how financial inclusion links to what we're talking about here in terms of what we think of good jobs.
I think that's a very good question, Noor. And let's start by actually explaining what financial inclusion is in simple terms. So my colleagues mentioned access to good jobs. In this sense, we're talking about access to financial products to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And this is actually part of the DNA of the organization that I work for, which is Visa. It's all about financial inclusion. It's all about how do we bring all those underprivileged people that probably are exempted in some way to this ecosystem to help them find the job and have a secure job, whether it's an employment or whether it's a self-employed job. And when we do this, actually, what we do is that we strengthen the availability of the economic resources and build the concepts of savings among those underprivileged and form a major steps towards what we call the inclusive growth. And we've seen a tremendous shift and the transformation post-COVID in the digital world, where inclusive digital financial services became a game changer for this sector of people and for this segment of people. And here we're talking about access to mobile money, online accounts, electronic payments, insurance and credit, and the combination of all of those, especially with the evolution of the new players that are called fintechs, that are really giving access and expanding access to all of those solutions. And we at Visa, actually, as part of our global commitment, this is where we want to be. As I said, this is part of our DNA, and we are committed to advancing such inclusive, equitable, and sustainable economic growth for everyone. And as a matter of fact, in 2015, we publicly committed to providing payment accounts to an additional 500 million unbanked people by 2020. And we are proud that we have achieved this and looking forward for the other millions that we can include them. How is this done? It's usually done through the partnership of the whole ecosystem. So, enablers like us, fintechs, our partners at the banks, the merchants, and most importantly, the governments and the NGOs, we all work together through either capacity building. We have, for example, our Visa Global Practical Business Skills, which we just launched globally and proudly in Egypt. We work with our partners like the National Post. I'll give you an example, a recent example from Egypt during COVID, where we gave access to more than 1.5 million irregular workers, or the blue collars, that got impacted by COVID, whereby we gave them prepaid cards to be able to get their salaries and ensure that they still get paid during lockdowns. We worked with fintechs to digitize micro merchants, thousands of them in Egypt and outside of Egypt. We worked also with fintechs to give access to micro and small credits on digital solutions. And we also work with a lot of organizations like the Unilevers and the PNGs of the world in order to digitize all the SMEs that work with them in the value chain in order to increase their business, their ticket sizes, and in fact, get financially included within the whole economic ecosystem.
Brilliant, that's amazing. And I think that brings me on quite nicely as well to my next question, actually. So you're talking about kind of the projects that you've been working on and trying to better financial inclusion in the areas that you work in. But who is it that we should be looking to be working on this idea of good jobs? And is it we should be expecting companies to provide more training for the new communities that they could be hiring, or is it that we should be looking at governments to be providing this, or startups, fintechs? Where is it that we should be expecting people to be working on this, or where should we be prioritizing this? And I'd love to hear from any of you. Maybe Oday first.
I mean, for me, that's part of WFE's mandate. We're just kind of trying to address a lot of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the one that WFP is accountable for is zero hunger, but it also kind of like bleeds into some of the other ideas. A lot of the stuff that I focus on is around youth unemployment, digital skill sets, upskilling people. And for me, the accountability, the way we try to do it and roll it out, at least here, is around creating kind of a bridge between the private sector and those communities. I've noticed, at least since the past 10, at least like in Egypt, it's been the past 5 years, but like globally, the trends of the past 20 years with startups and the economies of scale that are afforded to us by the internet, that you can really turn a unit of input into 10 units of outputs. And that makes it a lot easier for us rather than just going there, hiring a trainer to do a training and then like leaving that area. No, we can rely on companies that are using their marketplace, that are using the internet, that are going into those communities. And they're not looking at it as kind of a CSR or one-off thing. They're looking at it as a way to expand their market, to tap into a new customer base. An example of this would be outsourcing some of the jobs. So in some areas where we work, we can do some of the micro jobs where you can kind of gather data and collect it, and you kind of pay people a few cents just to go take a photo, to collect some data, to answer a survey, this is kind of income for them considered, and that kind of over time can make a difference if you do it on a daily basis for several hours a day. It's not consistent income, but it allows them to just like jump into this marketplace and take part in it. So we found that the private sector, particularly like startups that are looking to expand, that are growing, that are fundraising in the space of like logistics and supply chain, that are trying to use AI and need information to feed the kind of algorithm, they're the ones that we can try to partner with, create a list of jobs and tasks that we can outsource to those areas and help them either expand there or like hire people from those areas.
Brilliant. That's really interesting that it's private sector where you're seeing the most maybe tangible difference or where the most change can be made. Janina, is this something that you are seeing, or are you seeing something different? You're on mute. Janina, you're on mute.
Oh,
No, you're back. Yes.
Okay. I think in terms of, I think from a broad perspective, I think in terms of upskilling and reskilling and ensuring graduates have the right skills to make them employable, I think it's a dual role of both companies, other institutions, and also the state. I guess one specific example is as the pandemic hit in the UK, youth unemployment is not astronomical in the UK, but it's at a stubborn rate. And it's been at about sort of 10% for quite a long time, and it's not really coming down. And also we have the issue of a lot of people going to university who perhaps would be better suited to do something more vocational. So the pandemic came and there was the furlough scheme, but there was also the launch of the UK Kickstart scheme, where the government is working directly with companies to help them fund jobs, to basically get people into the jobs where there are skills shortages. And also it's targeting young people from varied backgrounds and disadvantaged backgrounds, people who perhaps may have fallen through the cracks and were in danger of long-term unemployment. So in many ways, the pandemic was an opportunity to try and tackle this issue. So this particular program was launched, and I have spoken to people both inside and outside the UK who've said that scheme is actually quite good. Only time will tell how effective it really is. But in terms of the way it's been set up and what's available to employers to sort of get the ball rolling, it's been really positively received. So I think there's definitely a role for both. I think another aspect is access to like ed tech. So there's lots of platforms out there where people can access lots of short courses. Coursera is one good example. People can take these courses in bite-sized chunks. And I spoke to Coursera earlier this year, and during the pandemic, they saw a huge surge in the developing economies from women who had been hit by job losses, furlough schemes as a result of the coronavirus crisis. And they were taking all these bite-sized courses and actively, using the technology to reskill themselves. And they've seen signs that this is paying off, and they're getting jobs out of this. So yeah, there are many positive things happening.
Brilliant. That's really great to hear. And I think it's really interesting to compare kind of what you were speaking about with what Oday's speaking about, and how different sectors or the government can be playing different roles in depending on the region. Oday, would you say edtech is something that you're seeing as well, or does it play a role?
Definitely. I mean, people are being very resourceful. You don't need like an official platform like Coursera. People can just go on YouTube. And that's usually the case with some of the communities that I've interacted with and been with. They would usually look at either the platform itself. So if they're looking at something in the gig economy, if they want to drive for Uber or another ride hailing company, they would just go there and do the training and register and do the paperwork, or they would just go on YouTube and try to figure out what is the skill set that they want to use. So I think people are being resourceful on their own. They're figuring out how they can do this, particularly like amongst young people, because we're seeing that the skill sets and the education that they get in the schools or university is not in line with what the workplace is looking for today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, great. And that brings me on to my next question, which we have answered in part. How is it that digital transformation can be helping to create jobs? So are there other ways which it's helping to create jobs other than what we've spoken about in terms of ed tech? And maybe Malak, it'd be great to hear from you first.
Yes, sure. So we've seen, as I said, the transformation post the pandemic, and the dynamics of the whole ecosystem has changed. So what digital transformation and technology did is that it provided access to new markets. So the data that we see on VisaNet shows that the growth of the digital payments and the e-commerce has enabled new cross-border activities with consumer money flowing between countries in the region and globally, actually. So you now can see a housewife that lives in the suburbs of Egypt easily selling her artisan products to anyone sitting anywhere in the world by a simple click. And COVID actually helped accelerate this digital adoption, especially at the segment of the underpenetrated segments that usually would have taken a lot more time. And it also actually helped expand a lot of the existing business and giving them new channels, which takes me to the other main change that we have seen that was driven by the pandemic, which is opening up of new channels. So in a lot of studies that we do at Visa, we see that the consumer behavior actually is changing. So for example, in Egypt, we always say that cash is our main competitor. Recently, we have seen that cash on delivery has dropped by a significant 85%, which means that all the merchants and all the SMEs, they now have a mandate, which is mandated by the consumers themselves, in order to go into new payment channels and business channels like the e-commerce, like the contactless, like the tap to phone, opening up new opportunities for those micro businesses and startups. Another key thing that we have witnessed is how the digital transformation helped the merchants in building insights that will help them apparently build the consumer loyalty. So now from when I get the payment digitally, I'm able to see what does this person pay for, his or her habits, when do they come to my shop, what do they buy, the seasonality, and so on and so forth. So accordingly, for me as a merchant, I will be able to target them through my marketing campaigns and my communication and my loyalty program, ensuring that they really turn into a loyal customer to my small business. Last but not least, we have also seen the rise of what we call the new enablers. I've talked before about the importance of the ecosystem working all together. And as part of this ecosystem comes the fintechs that we are seeing them now as not a drive for change, but actually the change itself. Suddenly, all of a sudden, anyone who did not have access to financial inclusion and financial product now can access all of this because they simply have a mobile on them. And this is what fintechs really enabled and accelerated. And this is an area that we are very much focused on at Visa in our region, in the developing world like North Africa, Levant, and Pakistan. We're really focusing on a lot of partners like Tag, NayaPay, SafePay, Fawry, Paynas, Kareem, and so on and so forth, to be able to provide easy to implement payment solution for the small businesses with the help of those fintechs.
Brilliant, brilliant. It's really great to hear that digital transformation is playing quite a key role in creating these job opportunities. Oday and Janina, is this something that you've seen, or are there any other ways that you're seeing digital transformation help?
From my perspective, I think The digital transformation is quite incredible, and the way that mobile phones in particular are allowing people, to monetize, and how it's accelerating small businesses globally is, really quite incredible. But I think the other aspect which we need to bear in mind, it doesn't matter which country you're located in, but I think it's important to remember that certain communities, we need to make sure that they don't get left behind in terms of access to jobs. For example, the pandemic has meant that, essentially, if you have a laptop and a broadband connection, you can work anywhere, in inverted commas. But, it may be that, let's say, someone in the UK wants to get a job at a call centre. Working at a call center now, it means that you don't have to go there in person, you can work from home, and everyone thinks, oh, how great this is. But there are some households, they may only have one laptop in the house. So, how do businesses work with people who have potential to do these jobs well? It's really thinking about that. Essentially, it's that idea of digital inclusion. It's just one aspect of that, making sure certain people in certain communities don't get left behind, and that everyone has the opportunity to do those tech jobs that can be done remotely. And I really do think that, many of us who are in good jobs with good employers, and we can work very flexibly, I think, it does well to remember that there are some people for whom that's not that easy. So it's thinking about how we make sure that they also have access so that they can come on that journey as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And as great as digital transformation can be, and all of these innovations that we're talking about, is important, as you said, to remember potential communities that can be left behind, or even risks that might arise from all of these innovations or kind of new developments. And I don't know, Oday, if you can comment in terms of what you've been seeing in terms of digital transformation, and even what are maybe some of the risks that come along with it.
Definitely, Noor. So for me, I think if you look at it from the perspective of like costs, right now, digital transformation has allowed a lot more people to gain access to the internet and to the technologies that have improved the quality of life in some way for several billion people around the world. If we look at how much a computer, a desktop computer, or a laptop used to cost 20 years ago, and how much it costs today, how much a smartphone used to cost, how much it costs today, this is really allowing, I mean, the term is like some communities to leapfrog. You don't need to go through the stages that like some other economies have went to be able to benefit from digital transformation. The idea is that just because we started with the desktop, then we moved to laptops and tablets and smartphones, you have some communities now that are immediately just starting most of their work life on a smartphone, and they're using that. They probably never have to work on a laptop, and they can do most of their job from that mobile device. And I think that can also translate in the fintech world, and how some people are getting access to a lot of these services, whether they want to create an account, whether they want to get paid, whether they want some benefits and stability. Maybe in some countries, it's all about going to a bank, having an account, getting a card, and going to an ATM and withdrawing money. In places like China, it's just about Face ID. You can just go and pay, and you only have foreigners just walking around with these plastic cards trying to pay. So I think for me, it's just about trying to see how much digital transformation has allowed some of these communities to leapfrog and change the way development has happened. You asked me about risks. Yes, I definitely think there are some risks associated with it. Obviously, the idea of that, like everything being monitored and knowing exactly, or using kind of your digital ID and digital footprint to dictate some other decisions poses a risk, and some governments and countries use it to different ends. But for me, that poses a risk about how technology can be, in a way, used to different ends. You have also the big tech companies that end up just creating these bottlenecks. So right now we're living in what we call like Web 2.0, where 5 to 6 social media companies dominate the landscape, and a lot of the information is just funneled through to them, and then it's just a brick wall trying to share that information or get access to it. So really, like the fact that the user becomes the data and you're monetized based on that, I think that would be some of the risks. And we're seeing some kind of developments happen away from that in terms of governance and ownership with the kind of next version of the internet. But these are some of the risks, I would say.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. And I think, yeah, as I said, it's important to just be aware of those risks. And as you've all said, there are maybe certain communities that are at risk of being left behind. And I think one of those things that we've spoken about, and I think Malak, you were keen to speak about, is especially women in these situations. And going back to what we were saying about financial inclusion, how can we be ensuring that they're not being left behind in these situations as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Noor, we've talked about it, and you know that this is a topic that is very, very close to my heart as a woman, I would say. So we are really focusing on when we talk about financial inclusion and we talk about the underprivileged, women definitely is at the core of this strategy and approach that we have at Visa, especially that women represent half of the world's working age population, and they play a critical role in the global economic growth. Yet, unfortunately, inequality still persists. So, women across the world earn an average of 54 cents compared to every dollar earned by a man. And this is according to the World Economic Forum. It will take nearly a century to close this gender gap. Um, a lot of organizations are working towards this, but I think there's a lot of efforts that still need to be done at the whole ecosystem level. We also see that women owned businesses are also more likely to miss out on funding opportunities. And this is proven by research where investors kind of, to an extent, favor male owned businesses compared to their female counterparts. So, by advancing women's equality and closing this gender gap in terms of pay and financial opportunities, we're talking about an incremental, huge added global amount to the GDP by 2025, an amount that is close to $28 trillion if women were to have an identical role in labor markets as men. And to help empower more women, our Visa Foundation has announced a lot of support, financial support, to women led or women supporting organizations across many markets, of which is Egypt, especially for the women that work in the small and micro businesses. We have grants. That aim at supporting the economically empowering Egyptian young women program and creating inclusive economic growth by supporting those, supporting their employment, and supporting their job placement. We also offered financial literacy programs across 30 countries specialized for women. We have a lot of mentorship programs as well for women within and outside of our organization. And we also have a very special program that's called She's Next that was launched initially in the US in 2019, but has also rolled out globally. And we're very excited to bring this home to the MENA region this year in order to support the micro and small businesses that are led by women entrepreneurs. By doing all of this, we are actually enabling a better inclusive environment. But our role definitely doesn't end there, and it is the role of each and every one of us to bridge and help us bridge this gap.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind. So thank you, Malak. And another thing that I want to talk about, especially when we're talking about work, and obviously the conversations over the past year have definitely been around more of a shift to remote work. And maybe this is something that's happening more in developed countries, but I think then has a shift and an impact on developing nations that we're talking about as well. So Janina, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what that shift is and maybe what effects that you're seeing from this shift to more remote work. Mute.
I'm not even sure where to start on that because so much has happened in this shift to remote work.
Mm.
I think I think for me, the shift means that we really have to focus, I guess, on really becoming more skilled in communicating with one another in many different ways. Because I know when the pandemic first kicked off, we were all sent home to work remotely. Well, should I say white collar workers? You know, I think it's really important to stipulate white collar workers were the ones who were able to work from home. It's more difficult for frontline workers because they have to be on site. But you know, this sort of great working from home experiment sort of showed how quickly we can adapt to this whole new situation. But then as we sort of start to look to the long term, and you're not going to be working at home all the time, and then there's going to be some time working in the office, we are now having to think much more carefully about how we work in this so-called hybrid model. And that's not proving as straightforward, perhaps, as some people thought. And I think, you know, as employees and employers, management is going to have to get much better. Companies are going to have to invest in their managers and teach them how to manage in a completely different way. You know, managers were used to monitoring employees purely by seeing bums on seats. That's not the case anymore. People have gained and want to keep autonomy that they've gotten from working away from the office more. And companies will need to invest in tech. They were already doing that anyway, because, I mean, while we are getting used to this new way of working, it's not, you know, if you were in a global organization, you're already working with people in different parts of the world anyway and communicating in certain ways. But companies are going to have to massively invest in the tech and communication tools that we use. And it's really going to be quite bespoke. Companies, I don't think, always realize how much work it's going to take to get this to work for everybody. It's really quite complicated. And then if you have a company where you are dealing with frontline workers and you have a whole tranche of workers who can work hybrid, how do you make the system fair? How do you introduce flexibility into systems where it seems a bit more rigid? You're on shift patterns, you have to be on site, you know, health workers being a perfect example. So we're really at a point where we're having to figure all this out, and there's no one answer. So it's a time where everyone really needs to talk about how we're going to do this.
Definitely. I think it's hopefully a time of a positive shift, but I think it will definitely
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It
yeah.
is positive. Don't get me wrong. It is absolutely positive. It could be really amazing what's going to happen. But I guess the key thing is being mindful of not letting it flip back to what it was before. I think that would be a real shame if that happens. So, but
yeah. No, and I think this shift to remote work hopefully can help create more jobs around the world. Ideally, it would mean that you can be recruiting from anywhere, but I know it's probably not as simple as that. And I don't know, Oday, if you can comment in terms of what you've seen in countries like Egypt. Is it really as simple as that? Is it helping create jobs in these areas? And maybe are there any risks associated to it?
Yeah, I mean, the historical analogy to what we're seeing after the pandemic with the white collar remote work is maybe late 70s, 80s with free trade for blue collar work. So a lot of the blue collar work that was in developed countries that was outsourced as a result of free trade led to a lot of like economic impact to that social class in those countries. And it also helped a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, in India develop and like really improve their economic growth. So there were like both sides to the argument. I think what we're seeing right now is the same thing happen with white collar jobs where a lot of the knowledge workers can work from anywhere they want, which means I don't need to pay for top talent that is based in big capital cities like London, New York, or San Francisco, but I can get that for a much better value in those other markets. Talent is the key thing, and kind of like being able to source it. So again, depends on how the company is going about this, how they're sourcing talent, and how flexible their policies are. In terms of like what I've seen, yes, definitely in some areas around the knowledge work economy, it's been easier for people to apply, but you still have some of the risk around like how you register, how you pay taxes, how we onboard you. Do you need to, for example, fly in for company retreats, and that means like what is some of the visa work and like travel arrangements we need to do? So there are these like logistical issues and admin issues that, while this like looks nice on paper, like we have to be wary of them. Um, but still, it is kind of leveling the playing field. So it is allowing anyone with the same level of talent and input to either start a company or to join a company. It is making it a bit easier. And you really have the internet to just go out and share your voice, whether you want to write an article, you want to publish something, whether you create some content via video or on any of the platforms. You can just go there and do it. And hopefully, if you get picked up, you do that, which is why we're seeing this whole great resignation where people are just realizing, I don't need to work in a company anymore. I don't need to listen to what my manager says. I can just go and do my own thing. I can go create my own career, build my skill set, and just do this, because now we have that leveled playing field and marketplace across the internet and across different companies where different people can come and take part in it. And you see it much more with Gen Z than any other generation.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what the results will be in the long term across the world, really, because I think we'll see different results in different countries. So that's really interesting. We've got some questions come through from our audience. So I will just ask this, and I'd like to hear from anyone that has an answer for it. So we've got a question from Svetslava from Bulgaria, and they've said, how do we fill the gap between what university students are taught in universities and what is actually needed from them in the business world? And then there's a follow-up of, how do you envision the communication between them and their roles in tackling youth unemployment? So anybody that has an answer for that, maybe Janina, you can start.
Yeah, I think to the first question, it's actually quite difficult. I think there has to be two-way. So I really do think, I mean, people might disagree with me on this, but I personally think when it comes to that entry level, I think companies have gotten too, I wouldn't say too fussy. I feel like there is less of a willingness to invest in people when they're just coming on board, and giving people a chance to learn how to do a job. For quite a long time, there has been this build-up of entry-level jobs where at least a year or 2 years experience is required. And I don't think you can blame that all on universities making students unemployable. I think some of that blame lies with those companies because they are simply not training people or giving people the opportunities that they did previously, because it's a trend that's happened over the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I read a really interesting piece, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, that looked at the average, number of years of experience that has grown within entry-level jobs, and it had gone from being a few months to being up to 3 years. And the crux of it was that, how is it an entry-level job if 3 years experience is already required? So I think that's a real problem, and I think companies, frankly, need to do more. But I also think universities also need to try and provide students with more of these skills that employers are looking for, particularly soft skills, communication, resilience, agility, adaptability. What opportunities can universities give students to be able to demonstrate these skills to employers? So it's tricky. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do think there's been too much of this emphasis on entry-level jobs requiring, quite frankly, too much previous experience, because then it's not an entry-level job anymore. And I think in the US and the UK, that's where you've got a very, very grey area of unpaid internships. They became a real problem, big problem. They are, I think the balance has tipped, and unpaid internships in many industries are now totally unacceptable. And they are actually illegal, but there are just loopholes that you can get around. But I think paid internships go some way to help, because you're providing the experience that someone needs for that entry-level role. So yeah, it's complicated, but I think, for me personally, I do actually think more of it lies with the companies actually doing more. And there are some companies that, big organizations with a lot of resources, it's easier for them, and they also connect directly with the universities. It's for smaller organizations that don't have the resources that it's more difficult. So it's how do you plug that gap? Perhaps there's a role for the government in there, to provide employability courses. I'm not entirely sure, but it's complicated.
Interesting. So I guess it comes back to what we were talking about in terms of who is it on to kind of help move us forward in terms of good jobs. Oday or Malak, I'd love to hear from you in terms of this gap between university education and the world of work, and maybe what that looks like in countries like Egypt.
Go ahead, Malak.
Sure. So definitely there is a gap. I think each and every one of us, whether in Egypt or coming from Lebanon, my home country, once we finished the university and went into the workforce, we were faced with the reality of the difference of the experience. But I think here, with a new generation, I think we're seeing a lot of the generation that is getting into the workforce. They're really focused on how do they upskill themselves even when they are studying. They have access to so many tools, to so many trainings, especially also, again, back to the pandemic and the digital transformation, which also has given access to a lot of the training and the capacity building and the skills material online, accessible to everyone, everywhere. There is a duty on those new generations to educate themselves beyond the academic part and beyond the university part and the educational part. And I think also a lot of the big companies and the big organizations are working on such programs where they they kind of adopt a lot of those new graduates and try to give them all the trainings and the exposure that they need. We're seeing also a lot of efforts from the Egyptian government and other governments towards the capacity building of those students, all the youth forums that are happening, all the initiatives that the Egyptian government is taking specifically towards the empowerment of the youth. I think they are moving the needle, and they are preparing them to be better equipped for entering the workforce. Oday, I don't know if you agree or disagree with me on Egypt specifically.
Uh, for Egypt, I think I agree, but like more generally, I think universities are just at a moment of reckoning, because what we're seeing now is like education is so widely available at such a high quality online that you don't really need to pay the fees that some US universities would charge to go and get that. And the question for a lot of companies is, do you still need that signaling that you went to an Ivy League university or a top tier university to be able to hire someone? Is this usually an equivalent to their skill set, or we don't need that? We don't need that. And I think you're seeing that with some of the most cutting edge companies, like you're seeing Tesla, you're seeing Google, no longer require people to have a university degree to be able to work. And so, if I were to kind of like look at as someone who's graduating high school today, I would definitely very carefully consider whether I want to pay those fees to enter university and graduate with student debt versus maybe getting a short-term like unpaid internship, and eventually that would eventually guarantee me a paid job. I think like now we have to reconsider the role of universities and the fact that a lot of education is way more affordable than what it is than what it used to be. Yeah.
Brilliant. And yeah, and as you've spoken about, a lot of education isn't necessarily in that formal 3-year, 4-year format. We've spoken about edtech and people doing courses online and being very kind of flexible about it. Great. Okay, we've got another question. So this question says, what does the future of work and unemployment look like following the Great Resignation? And so that's something that we spoke about briefly in terms of a lot of people realizing that they don't need to be doing the type of work that they're doing. So do you have any thoughts about what the future might look like? I'll leave that open to anyone.
Sorry, Noor, the line was a little bit breaking for me, so if you can repeat that. Sorry.
In terms of what we talk about with the Great Resignation and people realizing that they don't necessarily need to be doing their maybe 9-to-5 job or don't need to be working in a company, what do you think maybe the future of work looks like following that?
I can give my own insights on this. I think the transformation that we are seeing from a 9 to 5 to a very flexible workforce is giving the flexibility to everyone. So we touched base on that earlier. Now you can do any job from anywhere at any time. Before, 2 years back, if you wanted to make a move in your career, you had to really make a physical move per se in order to go to the hub markets and so on and so forth to be able to excel in your career. And I think now with those changes, whether the flexibility on time or the location, the organizations themselves are getting more and more convinced that no, you can do a job, you can be promoted, you can do anything from wherever you are, as long as you have the skills and the appetite to grow. And another thing which this helps the workforce with is also, the double hatting that you can do. So now with the flexibility of the working environment, you can also spend more time on planning your entrepreneurship life. And this is something that is very much trending, especially with the new generations. And that's why we're seeing the number of startups and fintechs are mushrooming, especially in our part in the world, and the appetite of those young people to grow their career paths beyond a regular 9 to 5 job. Sorry. And also the amount of new opportunities this could create. So I think we're all lucky to be in witnessing such an era of flexibility, and everyone, especially the newcomers to the workforce, should really make the best out of it.
Brilliant. Does the rest of the panel agree?
Yeah, I agree. Also, I think it leads to the fact that retention of talent is going to become a huge issue for companies. They really are going to have to work hard to keep people, which is good for employees because it means they'll get more of what they want, and also access to learning and development. Because the one thing that was happening before the pandemic and is definitely happening now is this constant constant learning. There's this thing called lifelong learning, and that is a skill in itself, where we all need to be curious and always thinking about how we can develop ourselves, both in a personal capacity. You may want to pursue something that's completely unrelated to work, which can be really beneficial, but also within the context of work, how can you develop your career? And if you've got companies which are fighting for talent in their attempts to retain you, there could be some really good opportunities.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oday, did you?
I'll just add like the kind of the sentence for me that really captured is, for a lot of us, our careers just was all about work-life balance. Now we're moving to more like work-life integration, and it's just about kind of like you can be on call, you can go do other stuff, you can just, particularly as a knowledge worker, you're more judged based on the outputs you do. It's a lot harder if you're a call center agent because every unit of input equals a unit of output. But for a lot of people that are working in this new economy and a lot of the new jobs that are going to be available between now and, for example, the year 2030, which a lot of them haven't invented, it's all going to be based on how much output you provide. And we're also seeing that trend of you don't need like a 5-day work week. The UAE now, they've implemented 4.5 days, for example, and they're reducing those working hours. So it's just about trying to find that right balance. And again, maybe like returning to something that was pre-industrial, something before the industrial revolution, where like it was all about having these jobs or having that vocation, being able to nurture it, carrying multiple like hats and just working across these fields. So I think that flexibility is very welcome, and it's kind of like very exciting to be living through that transition. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to see how these developments play out long term and how they kind of spread as well, hopefully. Brilliant. So we've only got about 2 minutes left. So I want to ask you one wrap-up question and hear from each of you. If there are any developments or innovations that you're kind of excited about for the future, and maybe the flexibility might be one of them, but I'd love to hear from each of you what it is that you might be excited about or optimistic about. And I think that will be a good place to end. Janina, maybe you can start.
Yeah. I've come across some companies, we've only very lightly touched on this. So this idea of working from anywhere is not as easy as perhaps people think, because there are tax implications, all sorts of things. And there are companies popping up now who are trying to ease that and allow companies to hire all over the world. And I think if people are paid for what their skills are worth, and it's not used as a tool to pay people less who live in other countries, and it's about the value of your work, I think that could be really exciting. I think if you really are living in a world where you could live anywhere and there are companies that can make that easier, I think that could be really great.
Fingers crossed. Oday, would you like to share?
Yeah, for me, it's actually this Web 3.0 that's being built out right now, the new version of the internet, now that we're moving beyond the social media era. For me, it's not just about like cryptocurrencies and going on TikTok and talking about a specific coin. It's more about the potential of what this new version of the web can allow from blockchains that allow us to kind of like validate some transactions, like being able to send settlements across the globe much more easily, stuff like decentralized autonomous organizations. So we're moving in a way where you're just having conditions and agreements imposed on you to you being part of the governance and being able to have a stake and contribute to the way that this is all being built. So I think that's very exciting and aligned with a lot of the trends that we're seeing both in the workplace and other fields.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think in general, it's hopefully a very exciting time to be living through. Malak, what is something that you're optimistic about?
I think what Oday and Janina mentioned is super exciting, and I mean, to me, coming from the payment sector, I'm really thrilled, um, not only about the innovations that we are witnessing every day, but more importantly, on the adoption appetite from the consumer side, whether that consumer is an individual or a merchant, towards this fast changing industry and innovation. And I think this is really changing the lives of millions of people, and it's really impacting them in their everyday life, whether when they're commuting, while they're working, while they're getting paid or being paid. So that's, to me, is something that always excites me and keeps me up on my toes, and see how we can really help those communities evolve even further.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being on the panel today and for sharing the things that you're excited, optimistic, concerned about. It's been really insightful, and thank you for your time. And now I will hand over to Virginia so she can let the audience know a bit more about what they can expect for the afternoon. Thank you
Hi,
for the
hi,
panel.
Noor. Thank you very much. And thanks to the amazing panel that we just learned from and listened to. So thank you so much, Malak, Oday, and Janina. It's really, really appreciated your help in guiding us through this complicated, but at the same time, such important SDG that we have analyzed thanks to your expertise. So thank you very much.